Welcome to Outlaw Woodworking. Welcome to Outlaw Woodworking. You know, one of my favorite tools in my wood shop is this Sawstop Professional Series table saw. This is the 3 horsepower, and I've added a router extension, and I also have another extension on the other side. So it makes the overall table. Right now I've got about 7 feet of table here. My outfeet table is pretty small, which in the future I want to add this little section to the outfeet table. But one of the things we're going to do today is we're going to add an accessory. I've been really happy with the Sawstop table, or the Sawstop table saw. I see some reviews where people aren't that happy with them, but the vacuum system, the squareness, the quality of the Sawstop, I'm really happy with. So they make other ones of these. Matter of fact, I've seen some guys, they'll put the same sliding cross table, but it's made by Harvey. But I've been really happy with the quality of Sawstop. I got the Sawstop router table with the fence. Now my router lift, I use Jesum router lift. I've had them for years, and I still have the same one, and it fit into that Sawstop router table. So I've been really happy with the Jesum router lift. But today we're gonna, I'm getting ready to do a lot more work where I'm cutting a lot of plywood. And when you're working by yourself and you're trying to slide sheets of plywood through your table saw, it can be tricky. And in the past I've built, I've built, my own little sliding fences where, I forget what they call them, but basically you make your own fence that you can slide parts through, and using the T-track to slide them through. And that worked really well, but I'm looking for something that I can actually push plywood pieces through for cabinets, and where it'll make it easy for me working by myself. So that's why we bought the sliding crosscut table. This is model number TSA-SA48. And the way I'm gonna set it up so that I can lay a sheet of plywood in there really easy and just be able to cut right through it. Anyway, let's open this up. Let's take a look at the parts and see how good they are, and we'll get this put together. Okay, right in the top of the box, you've got your installation guide. It looks like right here is 2 of your legs. Actually, we'll leave this in the foam. That looks like your top miter gauge, and some stops and some bolts. And here's your sliding track. And we'll leave this other piece in the foam. Okay, so here's all your parts. Not too much to it. A couple boxes, looks like we have one box of hardware right here. We've got, these are for Yeah, it looks like just one little box of hardware, so we'll see how difficult this is. Now, right off the bat, it gives you a set of Allen wrenches, a regular wrench. You've got some little round thing, I'm not sure what that's for. Bracket. And all the bolts are marked. So you have table or wing mount, support plate, auxiliary, ICS table, and ICS wing mount. So those are all the bolts that you need. Okay, let's get into the instructions and we'll start putting this thing together. Okay, I'm not going to bore you with the whole installation video. It took me, there's really not much to this, but it took me about an hour and 20 minutes total by the time I installed everything and squared it all up. The first thing you're going to do is mount your legs on the bottom side of the sliding table. And you mount these to the edge of the sliding table to give them the most support. And once you got those, you just hand tighten them pretty tight, but hand tight's fine. And you basically, in my particular case, it tells you to start on page 8. And that's where I started. And basically, I pull out some clamps and stuff thinking that I'm going to need to clamp that to the side since I'm working by myself and this is pretty heavy. But I really didn't need to do that. I just followed the instructions and I started off, like I said, I flipped it over, put the legs on first, and then I just leaned it up against the side of my extension on the table saw. And I basically followed the instruction. The first part of this instructions, like I said, was putting on the legs. And then the second part is basically lining up these 4 bolts that are going to go through the sliding table into the side of the extension wing, the cast iron extension wing. And basically I just lined all these up and I hand tightened them at first, and then I basically got a steel ruler and made sure that my top was really pretty accurate as far as being level with the table. And I basically used a straight edge and adjusted the legs first before I even tried to tighten them up. And then I started to use a clamp, but that didn't really work that good. But here you can see I'm using the straight edge to kind of level it all up. And this was a really, I thought it would take longer than this to install this because it seemed like, but it's so many precision parts. But basically the sliding table comes already assembled, so that part that you see me installing there, it's already 100% put together. You just have to bolt it on. And then basically you want it, before you tighten it completely up, you want to have this thing really level. And that's basically what I'm doing here. And I do the 2 ends of it with the straight edge and then basically tighten the 2 middle ones. So there's 4 bolts holding this thing on there. And it was a pretty simple install actually. And this is all like aircraft grade aluminum. And I'm not sure what the bearings are made out of, but they slide really nice. It's really smooth. I've got nothing bad to say about it at this point right here. And it's just, it can, like I said, this video was an hour long. I sped it all up just because I didn't want, that can be really boring to watch some tedious thing. But it basically went together very smooth. It was very, the instructions were really good. I did a standard installation, so it's not flush with the front, basically so that I could have the maximum amount of cutting ability so that I could lay a sheet of 4x8 sheet of plywood on there and just run it right through. Now right here I'm installing the outside piece,
and this is another part of the wing, the sliding table. That's and basically here's where I use a couple clamps just to kind of hold it on there. It's got a couple T-slot bolts that you slide in there, and then you just level it all up with that sliding table and tighten it down real tight. So that was basically the third thing. At this point, I've already done 6, 7, 8. So that's 8 bolts at this point, and there's only a total of 12 that you need for my particular installation. Now there is installations that where you use, there is some extra bolts for different types of saws and stuff. But right here I'm installing the fence, and basically it tells you where to line it up on the T-track. And right here I'm actually, it says to keep the fence 2.5 inches away from the blade at a 45. And I think you could put it a lot closer than that, but I went ahead and followed the instructions at this point. There might come a time when I move this fence a little closer to the blade, but right now it's I'm just going to follow the instructions and see how that turns out. And it has the 2 bolts right there that I'm tightening. They are reverse tightening, so you counterclockwise to tighten them, and you want them at the edge of the. It shows to put them at the edge of the sliding table. So once I get that pretty much bolted up, then it was a matter of loosening up the bolts on the actual miter gauge and sliding the fence over to the blade that's set at a 45 degrees. Then I measure it. It shows to set it 2.5 inches, so I go ahead and do that, tighten it back up. And at this point, that's where the fence is supposed to be. So I get all that tightened up, and then it was a matter of putting the knob in there. And basically you rotate, you pull the pin on the fence and rotate it out, and then install this big knob. And this knob is actually really nice. I mean, if you're an old guy like me, it makes it easy to unscrew and tighten that knob. Now at this point, I wanted to check the square of this fence. So I just basically, I ran my blade up to 0, and I already know that it's, I have had, just recently, I put a digital gauge on my blade at 0, and I know that it's pretty accurate. So then I put the square on the fence, a big steel square, and checked it, and it was actually pretty accurate right out of the box here. I didn't really have to do much adjusting. Now this little piece on the outside is 4 more little screws, and actually those are the last screws for this installation. The only other things that you install besides this is the stops, and they're just T bolts, and they have their own little adjustment knobs, and they just slide on the top right there. And at this point, it's completely installed. So now what I want to do is I basically want to check the adjustments and see how the plywood, like what I want to do is cut some plywood and check the squareness of the plywood and see if there's any special adjustments that need to be made at this point. Now in my case, I actually did not have to make any adjustments. I basically put it on 0 and tested it, and it was perfectly square with my blade. So if there's any adjusting that has to be done, I didn't have to do it at this point. Here I'm taking a piece of plywood, and I'm going to actually just run it through here and basically just holding on to the new fence, the new sliding fence, and see how it does. Now right here you can see I'm using my vacuum system, and no dust is coming out of there. And I basically run a cut through there and then flip it over and check it, and it bookmarks perfectly. So at this point I'm feeling pretty comfortable about the squareness of this.
Anyway, yeah, Sawstop, I've heard a lot of guys say bad things about Sawstop here and there. Mostly good though. But in my experience, since I've had this saw, and the safety features that it has, turn that off. It's well worth the money. It is an expensive saw, and the attachments are expensive, but This saw, you know, I use this area probably more than anything else in my shop, the router, the saw. So yeah, anyway, Sawstop crosscut table. Pretty cool. Now it does have, you know, because the legs aren't mounted to the ground, you do have a little bit of flex to it. So you kind of, if you can, you want to push from here, from right in the center of it. Like when I was doing that small piece of wood, I was over here, and if you push down on this, you know, you're flexing that so you could hit your thing. But if you're pushing from here, it's gonna glide right over that. Anyway, yeah, I'd have to give it a thumbs up. I think it was worth the money. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe, like the video, and I will see you next time. Later.